I'm pleased to introduce Tom Wheeler to Politics and Prose. Wheeler served as the 31st chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Before his time as the chairman of the FCC, he started or helped found several companies offering new cable, wireless, and video communication services. His previous books include Take Command and Mr. Lincoln's T-Mails. His new book, From Gutenberg to Google, attempts to contextualize our current period of rapid development by dissecting the two great network revolutions of the past, Gutenberg's printing press and the railroad and telegraph. These innovations of the 15th and 19th centuries connected people more broadly and quickly than ever, but they also represented major upheavals in the social order of their times. If this sounds familiar, Wheeler argues, it's because we're in the midst of the third great network revolution, the internet, with its rapid-fire change that both eases and disrupts our modern lives. Tim Wu, author of The Curse of Bigness, Antitrust in the New Gilded Age, writes, From Gutenberg to Google is an entertaining and erudite tour of the great networks that have defined our civilization. Wheeler makes it clear that confronting the technological challenges of our time without perspective provided by history is much like flying an airplane blindfolded. Now, please join me in welcoming Tom Wheeler.
Thanks, Katie. I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to go sit in the grandfather's chair or whatever while you did your thing, but I'm glad that you're using it now. It's wonderful to be here. Politics and Prose is a place that creates community at a time when technology is doing everything possible to break up community. So God bless Politics and Prose and what you all are doing. You know, we live in a time where technology has created this kind of turbulent change as to challenging and redefining what community is. There is a popular tweet that is going around that I printed out that lists the things that we take for granted that didn't exist in 2003. Facebook, Twitter, iPhone, iPad, Android, YouTube, AWS, Apple App Store, Uber, Airbnb, blockchain, Bitcoin, Square, Stripe, Spotify, Dropbox, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Pinterest, Kickstarter, Messenger, Quora, Tumblr, HubSpot, Hulu, Box Nest, Facebook, Oculus, Dropbox, Kindle, and 4G. That's the kind of revolution that we're living in. Our news reports today are being written by computers. The largest taxi company owns no cars. The largest hotelier owns no beds. And my personal favorite is that whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, Michael Newman, you got to help me out. Gastroenterologists or whatever have developed a pill that you take that measures what's happening in your gastrointestinal system, and it has been called the Toot Tracker. It delivers the information to your cell phone, to your mobile phone. But stop and think about it. 52% of the Fortune 500 companies in the year 2000 do not exist anymore. 52% of the Fortune 500 companies. And we've got wealth disparity at a 100-year high. So all of these things combine, and we go around and we say, oh, we've never had change like this before. Never so much has come so fast. And the message from Gutenberg to Google is that's not true. That we live in the prism of the present, and so we always want to define things by what we know. But if we put things in historical context, not only do we recognize that there are patterns, but it also gives us some ideas as to where those patterns might lead. The original information revolution, we think we're in the information revolution now. The original information revolution took place in the 15th century when Gutenberg picked the lock that had kept information locked away in order to protect the power of the priestly and the powerful. Martin Luther was not unique in his ideas. The 95 Theses that he nailed on the door at Wittenberg. But he was unique in that he was the first person who had access to a network to deliver those ideas. The Renaissance was isolated in northern Italy and given legs and wings by the printing press to expand beyond there. Let's see, the Reformation and decades of wars that followed, the Renaissance and all the change that brought, and we think we have change? That was the first information revolution. 400 years later, there was a double whammy of the railroad and the telegraph redefining our relationship with each other and our physical surroundings. The railroad was the first high-speed network, and it brought about the death of distance. Stop and think about it for a second. For as long as humankind had existed, geography was in control. You could travel as far as man or beast's energy could take you, and that limited your scope of experience, limited economic activity. The railroad comes along and blows right past that, eliminating geography, eliminating distance as the defining force in life. And then right on the cusp, on the edge of that, like 30 years later, the telegraph comes along. And if the railroad was the death of distance, the telegraph was the end of time. Because suddenly information was available instantaneously everywhere. The impact of these developments was only to destroy the economy that had existed around an agrarian base for as long as anyone could remember, only to tear apart families as the basic economic unit of the family was torn so the young ones could go into the new urban centers to become cogs in the industrial machine, to, of course, feed the Industrial Revolution and to create robber barons. So from Gutenberg to Google is the story of the network technologies that brought us to today and that form the history of our future, because the title is From Gutenberg to Google, the history of our future. There are two threads that tie all of this history and future together. One is the Darwinian evolution of technology. The roots of the new technology that we talk about today go back to these earlier revolutions. Peel back the onion on digital code, for instance, and you find Gutenberg's breakthrough concept of disaggregating and reaggregating the smallest parts of information. Look at the binary on-off signals of digital code, and it's the same as the dots and dashes of the telegraph. Similarly, we can trace, and the book does trace, computing to the steam era and the railroad. There is a nexus between the first individual to lay out the design for a computer with input, storage, calculation, all those key components that we have today in computers, and the development of the steam locomotive. And by the way, his other great innovation was he invented the cowcatcher. But his name was Charles Babbage, and we talk about him in the book. But technology-driven change always produces upheaval. That's the second thread. So the first thread is we've seen these technologies evolve to bring us to this point. The second thread is that when those technologies come on the scene, they always create upheaval. The good old days weren't. Okay? That we tend, as I said, we think of we look at ourselves through the prism of the present, and we tend to forget, or sometimes sadly never be taught, never learn the challenges that have faced us through history. The challenge to America, for instance, is not how do we make America great again? The challenge is to recognize that which made America great was that we stepped up to what was confronting us as a result of the impacts of these new technologies. Let me give you one example to chew around when you think, oh my God, we've never seen anything like this before. The railroad and the telegraph produced urban industrialization and destroyed local economies. To blacksmith, the heart of a local economy built around local artisans like blacksmiths. Two blacksmiths performed 11 tasks in 118 hours to produce one plow. When the raw materials for that plow were brought to an industrial facility, 52 men performing 97 different tasks produced that same plow in 3 3/4 hours. That created the sucking sound that pulled everybody out of rural areas, destroyed local economies, and created urban areas. If you track the growth of railroad mileage and the growth of telegraph lines and the growth of urban areas, the curves are identical because one fed on the other. And then you get into those urban areas, and what happens? Well, never have so many people gathered in one place, which means that you have huge sanitation problems and cholera breaks out. And so you've got to discover how you're going to work together to develop new safe water and sewage systems. Those masses of people coming together create public safety challenges. So you got to figure out how are you going to work together to create fire and police. Those people get sick. So you got to figure out how are you going to work together to move from the country dock to a hospital that can deal with masses of people. And similarly, you're going to have to work together to figure out how you move from the school marm in the one-room schoolhouse to an educational structure that can handle masses of individuals and prepare them for this new industrial world. So from Gutenberg to Google tells these stories to bring us to today. And it was at this point, as I was doing the research and writing this book, that I was honored to be asked to become the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. And it was an incredible opportunity for a guy who had been studying the impact of networks to suddenly have an opportunity to deal with the new networks affecting us today. I took some of the work that had been done and wrote an ebook called Net Effects, which tried to lay out my regulatory philosophy in terms of the lessons of history. And the things of which I am most proud of my term as chairman are the ways that we tried to make new technology work for everyone. Net neutrality, privacy, connecting schools, and dealing with the scourge of cyber. All of those issues that didn't exist back when they started making this list that I read at the outset. So today and tomorrow are the result of two parallel paths that developed through history. In one, you had ubiquitous connectivity coming up. Literally, the printing presses all over Europe were the first network, but moving up through the telegraph, the telephone, etc., to wireless and ubiquitous connectivity. On the other side, you had the development of low-cost computing power. And these two, for the last 50 years, well, for the last several hundred years, have been moving like this. The last 50 years, they accelerated, and then they had sex. Somebody from New York called me the other day after having read the book, and he said, "I can't believe that your editors allowed you to keep that line in there." But everything that connects, everything that computes now connects. And the result has been a wondrous breakthrough in so many things and so many new challenges. You know, we have now connected half of the people on the planet. In 2000, Millennium Development Goals set up by the UN set the goal saying by 2015, we want to eliminate 50% of the poverty in the world. 15% of the poverty in the world. They achieved that goal multiple years early, principally because of the connectivity that wireless devices offered and the opportunity that offered to those, to folks who had them, to build economic activity. But with connectivity comes responsibility that billions of people around the world are having to learn on the fly. You know, we saw what happened in Myanmar, where the Rohingyas persecution was organized on the internet. We've seen our work get horizontalized. The railroad came along in the middle of the 19th century and was the first big business in history. And so they looked around for managers and they said, well, gee, who's ever managed enterprises this big? And, oh, it's the Army. So it's no surprise that the early managers of the railroads were all West Point graduates, or all come out of the Army. And no surprise that you have industrial corporations structured like the military was. It created a rules-based hierarchy that now we see the horizontalizing of work. Nicole Wheeler McNamara is standing in the back. She works for SmartBridge. She works for Salesforce. And Salesforce has literally horizontalized all the work. And that brings with it a whole new set of problems. How are you going to provide for security? How are you going to provide for safety nets? And that we have to step up. I won't go through the list, but think about this. Networks are more powerful than nations. David McCain is here in the audience, just wrote a great, Ambassador David McCain just wrote a great op-ed on our role in the world. The networks mean that everybody is a publisher and nobody is an editor. Okay? So we have to rethink how we deal with information. It's created a whole new educational challenge for us. Randall Stephenson, the CEO of AT&T, told his people last year that he expects them to do 5 to 10 hours a week of new training if they expect to keep their jobs. We don't have an education system that supports that. And so From Gutenberg to Google concludes, after running through a whole bunch of other examples like that, with 4 factors that could move us to become, in fact, the greatest transformational era ever, as everything peaks, and maybe we finally do cross that cusp. One is the changing nature of networks. It's called Web 3.0 for the folks that play around in that space. Think about it for a second. Networks have always been in the transportation business of hauling something from here to here. And this marriage of computing and communication means that suddenly networks have moved to become not transportation, not providing a transportation function, but providing an orchestration function for masses of data that gets orchestrated on the fly in the network to create a new product. That's what autonomous cars are all about, for instance, right? It's estimated an autonomous car will produce 3,000 times the amount of data that one person produces today. And that information all has to be orchestrated at the network level. The second is, of course, artificial intelligence, and you've all been reading about artificial intelligence. We can talk more about it if you want. The third is blockchain, which changes the nature of trust. The concept of the core of banking, double-entry bookkeeping, was enabled by the Gutenberg printing press, spreading the word of a Venetian mathematician who had invented double-entry bookkeeping, which was a common way, it became a common way to keep score, so that this bank knew that this bank, they were all keeping score the same way, and they could do business together, and they would sell that capability. They centralized trust. And I don't care whether it's your bank or your credit card company, that's this they sell centralized trust. Blockchain now takes advantage of this distributed network to move that trust out to N+1 ledgers spread throughout the network, and to redefine the nature of trust. And lastly, cyber. Networks have always been attack vectors. I don't care whether it was the animal paths or waterways or roadways. They've always been attack vectors. And so why should we be surprised that the new network is an attack vector in and of itself? And so cyber is something that will be a continuing challenge for us that we have to recognize as a result of this network evolution. Finally, the power of a good book, and the reason you write a book, is because it stretches your thinking. I loved writing this book because I was discovering things. I am today fortunate enough to be at Brookings and Harvard, where they have given me rein to try and put new technology into perspective. Yeah, somebody was chuckling here. Yeah, right. And it seems to me that one of the things that we're struggling with today, particularly in this town, is that new technology has eliminated the time buffer that we used to have to adapt to new forces in our lives. And that things are coming at us so fast that that old, well, we'll work it out, doesn't exist anymore. And that democracy needs time for things to work out, to get worked out. It was designed to be inefficient, to make sure that everybody could have their input. But here we have an era in which people are saying, all of this change coming at me, I need answers. Which, of course, then it shouldn't surprise us when they turn to authoritarian solutions, or when they hitch on to popular causes, whether it be Brexit or Trump. Give me an answer. Just give me an answer. We are tribal people by nature. Democracy has required us to overcome that instinct in order to benefit all. But when we see that that collective benefit doesn't come, then the search for other quick, easy, simple solutions gains force. And when technology allows or encourages tribalism, which was my opening line here about the community of politics and prose, when we can't find an economic reason to overcome tribalism, and when technology divides us into tribes, that's the challenge that we have to come to grips with today. Because I say in the book that it is never the primary technology that is transformational, but it is the secondary effect of that technology. It is how that technology gets put to work. The secondary effect of the printing press was the Reformation and the Renaissance. Secondary effect was also the stability of written law and the scientific method. The primary effect of the railroad and the telegraph was industrialization, a mass media, connected financial markets. A secondary effect of them was also the dissolution of the Union into war. And so our challenge is, how are we going to step up to this? And I believe that the earlier revolutions harnessed people to make new rules, to deal with their new realities. And that we need new rules for the internet revolution. Stop and think about it for a second. When we left agrarian mercantilism and went to the industrial era, people looked around and said, oh my golly, The rules that worked in a mercantile society don't work in an industrial society. And so we came up with antitrust laws, consumer protection laws, worker protection laws, to create guardrails on the new reality that was being created by industrialization. And that was why we were able to flourish as individuals and as a society. We're now in a similar position today, where we need a new set of guardrails, a new set of rules to deal with the new set of realities created by the internet revolution. Congressman Don Beyer is sitting over here, and he's got the lucky job of figuring out how to do that. And it is a task that all of us need to make sure our policymakers understand, that it is not a retreat to the old. It is not let's flee today and go back to what we think were the halcyon days. It is, how are we going to do today what has been proven in history to be the successful response to technological change, and that's step up. So history is clear. Fleeing change is folly. The only way to advance forward is to address head-on the challenge of change. And what this book tries to do is to say, we've been here before, we can do it again. There was nothing superhuman about these people. And to challenge us to say, what are we going to do to deal with the impacts of the new network revolution of the 21st century? Thank you. Katie, thank you.
Thank you for your book. I look forward to reading it. Could you comment a little bit about the threat of the new technology, the digital technology, on the future of work itself, and whether there will be jobs in the future?
Yeah, history teaches us that there's always been the threat of, oh my God, the loom is going to put people out of jobs. Gives us Ned Ludd and the Luddites. I am actually a believer that artificial intelligence is not something that just sets out on its own, that it has to be supervised. I don't know. I saw back here, Homo Deus was sitting back here on your bookshelf, and I presume that Sapiens is here. I loved reading Sapiens. It has a wonderful story. Makes the observation that there are only two animals that man has successfully domesticated: the horse and the dog. And the difference is the dog also domesticated man. And every night when our dog hops up on our bed and we're going, hey, like I say, who's training who, right? Artificial reality is something that we have the ability to domesticate ourselves if we think about it, plan ahead, and remember that we're the ones who are doing it. Arlie.
Tom, thank you. We loved your last book on Lincoln and the Telegraph, and I can't wait to digest the new one. I have a slightly off-point question. Is there any way it could be arranged for you to return as chair of the FCC?
Thank you, Arlie. Thank you. I think Carol might have something to say about that. Ron.
Tom, you said that these days everybody's a publisher and nobody is an editor. And I just as a follow-up to that, with the cellular telephone, the internet, and so forth, what do you think the impact of that is on the public's ability to get the truth about groups and issues and what the government, particularly in Washington, about what the government is doing?
Ladies and gentlemen, in the section of the book that talks about this issue, I quote this gentleman, Ron Nesson, telling a story of when he was with NBC News and dared on air express an opinion in favor of peace during the Vietnam War, and got off the air. It was live TV. Got off the air only to be confronted by the head of NBC News, who says, "Ron, nobody cares what you think," because the prevailing concept of journalism at that point in time was not to express opinions. And the technology now has moved to a point where the only way you can stand out in a multi-channel environment is to express opinions. And the more crazed, the better. So if we have lost the curatorial function that used to exist in the morning newspaper or the 3 television networks or whatever the case may be, and have outsourced reporting, then we need to develop systems that allow us to outsource, allow us to recognize that our editorial judgment has been outsourced, and that the laziness that we develop when we were counting on others to help us is no longer acceptable. Now, 1, 2. I think so this then leads us to, what do we do about the platforms? Google, Facebook, all these sort of folks, YouTube, who are promoting, who are the vehicles for this. I think I have the world of respect for Mark Zuckerberg, and I really enjoyed my relationship with him when I was chairman. But his statement that they aren't publishing, that they're just a technological platform, is malarkey. And I cleaned that up. And there needs to be an assumption. There needs to be an appreciation, an expectation. That's the word I'm looking for. There needs to be an expectation on the part of these platforms as to their duty. Let me just give you a quick example, and then we'll go to another question if there is one. When in the middle of the 19th century, when railroads started going across private property, spewing hot cinders, it set fire to houses and barns and hayricks. Well, who was to blame? And so the common law concept of a duty of care was applied, in which the legal concept of negligence comes into being. And the question was the railroad doing anything to prevent those fires, to try and mitigate those fires from happening the first time? And so the railroad started putting screens on the top of their smokestacks to catch the hot cinders. That's a duty of care. That's stepping up to make sure that you are not negligent in what you are doing. And that same challenge exists today for the platforms and for the networks that deliver the platforms. And we just need to put in place policies that create that expectation. Don. Uh-oh.
One of the things that I'm interested in is the concept of happiness, right? Very important, I think. And folks generally agree that the transition from kind of hunter-gatherer to agrarian to industrialized society saw a decrease in happiness along the way. So I'm wondering, as we move forward, new technological advancements, what role, if any, does the concept of happiness have? Do we think that as technology advances, people are becoming more happy? Is there a way to use technology and guide the evolution of technology such that it does increase happiness? And just kind of your general thoughts on the intersection between the two. It's an extent there is.
Wow.
An intersection.
I've been asked a lot of questions, but I've never been asked about technology and happiness. I don't know, and it just seems to me that happiness is what you make of it. And, you know. All right, this is good. We've exhausted all the questions, sir.
Last question. I think I'm probably the youngest person here. Hi.
Well, thank you for being the youngest person here. It's going to be your problem, you know. So let's just, you know.
I'm a computer science and government major.
Good.
So, thank you. My question is about sort of the solutionism of the tech industry at times. Mm-hmm. There's this idea that we should kind of connect everything, put everything online. And so my question is that, like, putting things online often implicates all these cybersecurity risks. And actually, if you do a cost analysis, it doesn't always actually make sense. So when we talk about the network, do you think there are cases where things shouldn't necessarily join the network?
Well, obviously, you need to have air gaps and other security structures that will keep you from the network, so that SCADA systems and things like this aren't getting screwed up. But you're going beyond that. You're saying, are there things that only should stick to 20th century technology instead of 19th century, instead of 21st century technology? Yeah, books. People need to buy a lot of books. But I think you ask a really good question, and that is that it's worthwhile to ask: is this trip necessary? Is this trip essential? And we all ought to be asking that kind of question. Thank you for asking that. Hi.
Thought I'd better get a female voice here.
Good.
And that's my question: is in terms of the driving of these new technologies and the adaptation that goes with them, and regulation controls and so on. Where is women's role currently?
Well, it should be on the front line. And I think I think it is something that the folks in Silicon Valley, the men in Silicon Valley, are beginning to understand. I had a personal friend, woman, this week, literally, who emailed me that she's leaving Silicon Valley because it's just too difficult for her to exist there. And I think that what we have to do is we each have to say that we'll step up for the things that we can control and do our responsibility. I was happy that in the chairman's office at the FCC, I had a woman, female chief of staff. I had more female staff than male staff, and we had throughout the commission. And that means that you have to sometimes force thinking that way. I think that I think that Silicon Valley is beginning to wake up to that reality. Well, this is good because I've got another half hour here of. Well, if that's it, thank you very much for coming, everybody. Thank you.